Pleasure to be here today. Don and I are going to have a few slides, but we really want this to be a conversation. Please use the Q&A. We're going to talk about fueling and funding your education program. And so we're going to kick it off. Don? Oh, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. There we go. Don, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, as we planned, we're going to talk about this past year and how it's really changed and how associations have had to pivot so quickly and how they delivered their education content last year and how they did such a fantastic job. And, they had a successful year, even though we had COVID and everything had to go virtual. But what I really want to talk about with you today, Dan, is how we move forward post-COVID. Full disclosure, everyone, Dan and I have had this conversation before several times. We like talking about it because we each have our own clients and, what we're hearing from them, and then we discuss it with each other. So I'm really excited to have this conversation again so that you all can listen in. Dan has expertise and knowledge that I think a lot of people should hear. So prior to COVID, though, Dan, you were a huge advocate for hybrid meetings. And I think that's what everyone's talking about moving forward now that we can maybe go back to live meetings soon. In fact, you promoted an advanced model with your clients and prospects, but found that many associations felt it was too expensive to pursue. Cost was one factor, but the other was that this association decision-making has traditionally been driven from a meetings perspective and not a continuing education perspective. How do you think COVID has changed all these dynamics?
Well, thank you, Don. And I think everybody went through that immediate shift. And I'm going to pull out some old stats because I love using these stats. This was a study from ASAE before COVID on why people belong to associations. And education is such a huge part of it. So between the 4 and the 3 being very important or important, 92% of members want to be educated. And what was really interesting was before COVID, the average association only got 15% of their members to come to their annual conference. And so why weren't we focused on the other 85%? Well, part of it was fear that, well, if I put it online, then they won't come. And it's such a big part of my funding and my profit that I really need to make sure I protect it. And then when COVID happened, 15 went to 0. And we had no choice. And I think everybody put down their barriers and said, I can't do nothing. I have to do something. And a lot of people discovered some really interesting things. People engaged, and a lot of organizations got 50, 60 and more, 70 or 80% of their members to engage with this content. And it was interesting. The people who regularly come will say, hey, I still want to come. But the people who never came, could, for whatever reason, were exposed to the content. We found a lot of people were very interested in that content, and there's a thirst for that. So we weren't, now that we look backwards, we realized we weren't filling the void. So now that we're hopefully coming out of COVID, as we move forward, I think there's a lot of lessons that can be applied as we're now shifting into this new hybrid model. And we're going to talk today about some of the things that we're seeing, what people have already done. And we're going to talk about what we see people are struggling with. And as they're looking ahead and trying to anticipate, how long do I have to stay virtual? When can I go hybrid? And how can I afford to go hybrid? Because it is expensive. Don, what do you see?
I see that, in the past year, most clients, they didn't do a hybrid. They just took their annual meeting as it always existed and they streamed it. They delivered some sessions on demand, but they tried to do everything exactly like they've always done it, but virtually. So they didn't make any changes. And a lot of it has to do with they just had to pivot so quickly. Yeah. But now they are looking at the hybrid in the future. And I think they're thinking that it's not going to be as successful as either their live meeting once was, or as successful as 2020 virtual meeting. And that is concerning to them. And I think that you know, their success of the virtual meeting this past year might have been a little bit of a false positive because everybody was home. They had nowhere to go. So the idea that they could stream 8 hours of content, just like if everyone was there live, well, it worked. But that's not gonna, I mean, when everybody gets back to life, I mean, last year they were so excited to see somebody and to connect. And that was the only way to do it. Going forward, that won't be the only way. So we have to figure out, what will happen going forward. Are you seeing the same thing?
I mean, we are. I mean, and not just in the association space. I think we're just seeing it with digital consumption. I mean, if you go to Netflix today, how many people have put a series out now instead of everything in one big movie?
Mhm.
And even though you might sit there for 4 hours, but you sat down because you only thought maybe an hour was all you were needed. But we're definitely seeing that. We're finding meeting planners are still afraid to change from a model that's worked so well for so long. And so we've done some virtual conferences where there's been 20 tracks, 20 at the same time. And we had one where we started at 3 in the morning, we finished at like 10 at night. And you just go, that's just too long, especially as you mentioned, when people get back to work.
Mhm.
But we've also had a few that have looked and said, look, I can't do this. One particular association that comes to mind is in the healthcare field, and they knew their members were on the front line of COVID, and they just knew that it wasn't going to work. And so they decided to say, hey, what if I take my 3 days and spread it out over a month? What if I take the amount I live stream and I live stream an hour and a half a day on, and I only do it every Monday. And they did it every Monday throughout the month. And everything else was featured, but on demand with some special programming to make it feel like it wasn't just on demand. And they got 80% of their members to attend. And what's really interesting is this association gets less than 1% of their members to show up at their annual conference. So now there's 79% of their members who've now been exposed to the quality of their content.
Mhm.
They're seeing qualitative feedback. They're seeing high engagement scores on their on-demand. Retention is going to be easier than they'd hoped, or that they thought, I should say. And it's also that content now is in a really good position to help them with recruitment. But the other thing that happened was they were able to maximize their revenue because people were actually joining even midstream. They were coming in and going, because it's all on demand, I don't mind paying the fee after the fact. So we had as many as, we have clients getting 20, 25% of their registration revenue after the event, the live part of the event is over, which is really interesting.
Definitely. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do too with in the past, all of the decisions are made by the meetings department. So everything has just centered around the annual meeting for so long. And even this past year, it's just all about the annual meeting and how we can just make that happen in a different way. But I think what we need to talk about a little bit more is as we look at hybrid or the future, because we've learned that people do like to consume the content other than being in a live meeting and flying there and all that. But we have to look at how it's collected and how it's delivered more throughout the year rather than just for this annual meeting. And I think when we approach the term hybrid, most people think of it as, like we just said, basically two meetings going on at once. And I think when you look at it that way, it's just too much. It's a daunting task for everyone. I mean, now you once told me that it is costly. You just said something about $105,000 is what you should budget in addition to regular live meeting costs for a 3-day, 2-track event, correct?
Well, so I put some slides together just to go through it with people, but so let me just actually pop that up because I think what you're onto is The creativity that was started with virtual is actually going to get, I think, more creative. I'm really excited about what hybrid is going to force, because hybrid is expensive. And so it's going to force a new way of thinking. And so we think the future is blended. And what do we mean by that? Is, yeah, most people think of it as, I'm going to show up for the same 3 days and get 80 to 100% of that content live streamed to me. But that, and maybe I'll have access to the on-demand for, say, 0 to 60 days, or if it's continued ed, it'll show up in my LMS. But if you do take that model, and I use 3 days and 3 tracks, and
Okay.
Don, in my example, and 8 hours a day, and if I did live stream, let's say 75% of it, to have 3 crews on site, the cost of the hotel, the internet, it's about an extra $105,000. So if you look at the break even, and I used $150, that's an additional 700 people before sponsorship. A lot of smaller and mid-sized associations are going to go, I can't afford that risk because I have to commit to it up front. And so we think blending's the future. What if you pre-recorded 5 to 15%? What if you even release some of that content to early birds? Maybe 2-3 weeks in advance of the event to get that last push of registration really moving. Yeah, you don't have to, but you could. During the live event, well, of course, the people who do show up, that's a 3-day event with 3 tracks. But you don't have to live stream at all. What if you only live stream 3 or 4 hours a day, and you only need 1 crew instead of 3? But while you're there, you're recording it, and you're capturing the balance to release after the fact. That model delivers the same content for a third the cost. And when you really start looking at it, your members will thank you because you haven't hit them with a fire hose, right? I always love to say, Facebook doesn't launch all their content on Monday and take the rest of the week off. They drip it. And this is an opportunity for your sponsors to get way more exposure, so you can actually charge more on the sponsorship or the exhibitor side as well. And so your actual overall profit goes up, which is really what we need to do. Because if we're going to engage 70 or 80% of our audience, we should see a larger value proposition for sponsors. We should see a larger registration total revenue. We should see more overall profit. And I love the trickle-down effect, because the trickle-down effect means I should also have higher recruitment and retention. So we think blending is where the creativity will come out, because people are going to expect the people who come live will continue to come live. However, there's going to be, that 15% I had up earlier, there's going to be some companies who go, I'm sorry, you're not traveling until 2022 or beyond, and we're frozen budgets. There's going to be some people who are just still a little bit shy. So maybe that 15 goes down to 12 on average. It's not going to go to 0. There is a diehard group of people who want the networking, want the personal experiences, want the nice locations. That will stay. But it's been proven already that there's a demand for that education. And sometimes I think we put so much emphasis on the physical event and the virtual platform that we forget it's our content that is king, right? Mm-hmm. And so I really think that we're going to see this move. And this is an example of that client I was talking about earlier, where they live streamed every Monday, but everything else was on demand. And the results, I mean, instead of 400 people, we had between the live part and the on-demand part, 11,874 of 14,000 members engaged. And so it works. The data is there. And so it's just a matter of, well, how do we leverage this in such a way so that it always works? And so, I encourage people, don't be afraid of the cost. Find ways to differentiate the physical from the virtual. Overlap where it makes sense. That's the part that's live streamed. But think about what you said earlier, Don, which is people are back at work and they will not be able to give you 8 hours a day. what's the increment that makes sense? For the client I'm showing you right now, these people work in senior care homes, hospitals, and their live stream was strategically placed to be in between lunch and dinner. And it worked. And so you just really think of your members and their behaviors and try to find the formula, because the content has a shelf life for probably 2 years, but let's say months to be safe. And so it's not important that it all has to come out on the same day.
No, but I think the key to delivering content differently is also collecting the content differently with a different mindset.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to not just think of collecting content for an annual meeting, but collecting content for all your delivery methods. And how is your association presenting this? Are you going, how is the content going to be delivered is one thing, but it has to all start from the collection. And I think there are a lot of ways they can do that differently than how they currently do it. And so instead of starting like we've always done, oh, we have this delivery method called the annual meeting. Oh, let's have a call for abstracts and posters and everything to create the content to have at this annual meeting. I think we have to kind of flip that around and say, okay, let's have an association-wide meeting and let's collect content. But what are we collecting it for? How are we going to let these topics out? Things like that. And I think once that switch happens and the education department is working with their subject matter experts and everything on how they're going to present it, then they say, okay, here's the content we're going to have. And you bring in all the different delivery departments, then I think you can really make some changes in how it's delivered.
I totally agree. And I think, you know, that's the part. I mean, you're very much involved in helping associations with speaker management. And I want to start hearing more on, what are the missed opportunities there? And just, what are you seeing is that opportunity to shift from just an event mindset to that more, hey, this is content that can be curated and used all year long.
All year long. And one of the things I think that we're seeing more and more, and we have one client that did this forever, and that's kind of how we learned about it. And now the more we tell other clients about what this one client has always done successfully, which is collect a fee for when someone goes to submit an abstract or a proposal or whatever, they have to pay. Now, some clients do it, they do maybe $25, $30, something like that, just some sort of fee to kind of weed out. Some people will just keep submitting a bunch of stuff to see if something sticks. So they will do their best. So this does a really good job of reducing that, $25, $30. We have the one client, they have collected $85 for each submission, and then they double it for late breaking. And nobody has ever said a word. So, I mean, that is one way to kind of offset some of the costs. But I think one of the things you could do with that money, that when you collect the content and charge them, that's a great option for them to use, for the association to use that money for your virtual videographer.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's, what I like about what you're saying there, and I'll bring up a couple of slides here in a sec, but what I really think is cool is that if I'm collecting with the mindset that I'm going to charge them, and I know some of your clients will put up a fee to kind of just separate the people that are serious versus non-serious, yeah. But when you're collecting beyond the event to say, I need to fill my content streams for during events and post event, it changes the mindset. Not only can I now use this content, but then, what we've found, and I'll turn on my slide here, is that when you start thinking this way, you start getting creative. So let me show you an example. I hope that you can see my screen now. But our virtual videographer technology has been used to film a lot of speakers, right? Because speakers are all over the place, and we need to get that content, whether it's in advance for a virtual event, or maybe now in advance for a hybrid event, or maybe it's just because we need some short form content. When you're thinking about capturing content that, well, you know what, this fits into not my event, but maybe it fits into the after. It can be filmed so economically now using remote control technology like this technology.
Mm-hmm.
Which is again about a third the cost of filming, but you get high quality that can be produced. But then all of a sudden you can start going, how do I want to release this? And so it could be released live, it could be released pre-recorded, it could be released in full form, but you can also, let's imagine I was going to use this because maybe it's continued ed. So I'm going to create some micro learning and some social media awareness versions of this video to drive people to my LMS after the fact or to the full session. Sherry was talking about her podcast. People like long form, they like choice. And so if you have the time and you're not rushed, it's not much extra work. Like it's literally 5 minutes to take a video and make it a podcast. And what about transcribing it for an article or a website PDF? You can basically take one video and you can make about 20 different assets out of it. But where the power comes is when you organize it into a workflow. And so now all of a sudden you've used one piece of content that ideally your speaker paid you, right, for.
Yeah.
And you've created awareness to pull people into your website. You've created micro learning for them to decide, yes, this is where I need to spend my time. And you've created the full learning that only members get access to, or those that registered for the event, or those that paid in the LMS, depending, or those that attended the webinar. And you've given those people the choice. Do you want to read, watch, or listen? Watch your engagement go up. Watch your pull go up when you start using media in this flow. Because we've all been trained online. Check it out in micro. Yep, it's worth my time before I invest my time. And so that's what members expect. And it works like magic. I'll show you a real life example of one where this particular client uses social media videos here to drive with one click and pull that person, in this case from LinkedIn, right into their association where the micro learning can be watched. And look at the banners. Do you want to watch, in this case, it was a webinar, the full podcast, or the presentation? Give them choice. And then when you go in there, it could be member only, it could be a fee. This happens to be a lead generation form for new membership. And so that flow is not only easy, but what it's basically doing is it's setting up to get people to go, you know what, I have great content. The only reason you don't do well with this content is because you missed the event. And if you think, for all of those that are listening today, how many of you had 80 or 90% of your engagement during the live, but very little in on demand? And the reason for that is because it was stuck in your on demand platform. It's like my webinar stuck in my webinar platform. If it's on your website and it's freely easy to find, and you use tools like I just shared to pull people in, you'll have the opposite effect, what I shared in the bar chart, where 3/4, actually 2/3, roughly between 2/3 and 3/4 of the entire engagement was on demand. And that's where your ratio should be. For every person that shows up live, whether that's live into your physical event or live on demand, you should do at least 2 to 3 in on demand. And if you're not doing that, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity around how you curate your content, how you deliver, how you spread it out over time. But it's a huge opportunity to maximize engagement.
Right. So, I mean, once you understand the content, you have to look at your year as what topics, what do you want to focus on? Now, the annual meeting has always been, especially in the medical industry, a place where there's going to be new things that are announced and new content that's announced. And that's a great place to have record it there live, because a lot of times they're not allowed to say anything until then.
Right.
So that is also great. But think about your when you're deciding on the content, if you end up having it, you know, you through your speaker management system, you can connect directly to the, are we at 12:30 already?
Yeah.
We are, but keep going. We're good.
Oh
Well,
my gosh, I'm so
I know
sorry.
time flies, Don. I tell you what I'd like to do is I'm gonna pop up, there's a couple of your slides that we didn't cover, and I would like you to maybe just spend a minute on them, because
Oh,
I think they're really pertinent to this discussion.
oh, yeah,
And
what I wanted to share with, are some things that clients can do already, to create an all year experience along with their session content that they already have, and they just need to leverage it. And I think that could help out as well. One is the exhibitor, virtual exhibitor gallery. This is something that I know as a company, threw together and just gave our clients, um, just, for free, because they had to have a virtual meeting. Well, why does this have to just stay up for the 3 days that you're going to have your live meeting in the future? What we're discovering from clients is that even if they go back to the live meeting, this virtual exhibitor gallery is staying, and it's going to stay up long term. It's a great way to, for the exhibitors to have year-round connection with your membership, and also it's a great revenue source for you, especially medical groups. They have to keep it separate from the sessions. They can't really have sponsorships for the sessions. So why not have this up there? It's kind of like .org Community Solution Center. Why not have that for your association?
I think it's also great if you could chat. I wanted to bring up that example, this here, the one here, and have you really speak to this thinking beyond the event while you're engaging those speakers, and thinking to collect content where then you can decide how much of that content I'm going to, or what topics I'm going to use at the event. But rather than saying, no, call me next year,
Right.
where else can I apply this?
Like right now, when they do their call for abstracts or call for proposals, a lot of times they say, oh, do you want this to be an oral, a paper, or a poster? Well, why not say, I'm submitting with this topic, and I am interested in it being a year-round commitment, and taking this content and making it into a couple different delivery methods. So, that is something else that they can do.
And I
Oh, and
think you're,
you can manage it all with the speaker management.
yeah.
And that is a great way of doing it. Why collect information from them just for the annual meeting? Have this going year round and communicating with them.
And this could even, because this is content, this could even be sponsors that are putting in content. It might be a little different fee than the $30 example,
Right.
but we wanted to get to this, and then maybe we should open it up to questions.
Yeah.
Is really changing the mindset that it all has to be around this physical event, as so much of our engagement is now digital, and getting back to this, hey, how should meeting departments be aligned going forward, in your opinion, Don?
I think that it should not start with the meetings department. I think it should start with an association-wide content plan for the year. And then the education team uses their expertise to collect that content. And then each part, you have your meetings team, you have online learning, all of them get together, and how are we going to take this content and leverage it year round, as you were talking about earlier, Dan. But it can't start with the meetings department saying, we're going to have our meeting from March 4th to the 7th, and in Chicago, and now I need to fill these rooms. It's always been about filling rooms. It can't be about that anymore. It has to be about content. Rooms will fill automatically if they know that you're a great provider of content, and sometimes they'll want to be there live.
Yeah, I think this is so relevant. Like, so earlier I said content is king, distribution is queen, and so we need to think about the content the same piece of content flowing across all of these media, all of these formats. And so what that's going to force people to look at is my platform, my website as an association needs to be tuned to be able to handle hybrid and virtual and on demand while I'm still having a physical event. And if that creativity, because of cost, is going to force us into automatically extending. And so what Dawn's trying to tell us is don't just extend it for a month, like my example. Think of curating that content for as long as the content has a shelf life. And think about collecting content regularly and then deciding where does it fit? Event, non-event, on-demand, webinars, podcasts, or multimedia, because the content is so good, it's worth producing in a multimedia format and making it available in read, watch, and listen. Pick them all.
Yeah, and have your e-posters included in that. Why are they just up for the meeting?
Yeah. So we have gone a little over time.
Yeah,
Surprise,
sorry.
surprise.
I'm known as a talker.
So
We're all
Sherry,
good.
let's open it up.
We're all good. It seems like everybody has been staying on. So if you guys have Q&A or questions, please put them in the Q&A. In the meantime, Bruce Rosenthal, he does work as a consultant that does work around strategic sponsorship consulting, and said reaching significantly more of an association's members over a period of weeks or months is a great way to attract corporate sponsors, larger audience, and an ongoing basis equals higher sponsor fees. And I'll say, we just ran a think tank in .org community around, what do we do about sponsorship? And everybody's been struggling with that this past year. So I think that's, all this kind of content curation, which Dan, you've been talking about to us for years, and distributing content in different ways and looking at that as in the content marketing as, really good opportunities for corporate sponsors. So I think you guys provide some great examples of that. And if you have any other comments on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, Bruce is absolutely right. That time frame not only creates maybe potential for higher prices, but it creates a new inventory. And so you can get it from either more inventory, higher prices, or a combination. But the other thing that happened, I think, during COVID, Sherry, that you just touched on, is there are a lot of associations. Healthcare is an example that are there was a church and state mindset between sponsored content and not. And a lot of people relaxed that because they had to during COVID. And most of them realized, what, this was actually good. These vendors actually have some great stories, case studies, future forward trends that are worth sharing. And not only does that take the effort off your own shoulders on filling your content calendar, but it also creates that revenue two ways, right? You're getting paid on the front end as well. So that's another area of growth in this kind of approach that Dawn's suggesting, which is we've already got tools to capture this in an organized manner for events. If we just remove the word event and replace it with association, it changes our perspective.
Hey, Dan, I see that Sarah Jones has a question, and you have answered this for me in the past, but I think this is a great time to mention the Netflix approach for pricing. And she's asking about any advice on how to price on-demand and live stream content versus the cost of an on-site event ticket. And I think we've talked so much about the year-round education. Should they have to pay for each piece, or is it a monthly fee? There's many different ways of looking at it.
You have to look at where you came from to where you're going. So some of our clients, their continued ed was like 100% in person before they went through COVID and shifted. And so to go and automatically having to, every time I show up for one course, having to pay, creates friction. Just like, just like any other friction in any of your other e-commerce environments. And so some of our clients have adopted that Netflix model, which is, hey, let's set it up, one price, a subscription model. It works. And it's like, didn't have to look very far to find it where it works. A lot of people are adopting a subscription model. And by the way, membership for an association is a subscription model. And so and what they're finding is, wow, you've got enough of a revenue to reinvest. So my content is good, my content is current, but I don't feel like I have to pull my credit card out every time I come to your website. And so you want to create that balance. So we're going to see, I think, a big shift into one of our clients in Chicago is the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, and they did this, and it's just been a phenomenal boom. But at the same time, they have certain courses that they have to do pay-per-view. The way they've licensed it, the way they just have to. And so a blended model there can still work. And so we have applied a blended model there as well. And they look first to say, if I can, let's offer it in the annual subscription. But if I can't, then let's differentiate and explain why.
And it's a great way to drive membership too, because sometimes associations can't make too much money to keep their not-for-profit status. So covering costs is probably something that needs to happen, but making a whole lot of money is not necessary. But growing membership is very important. If they have a reason to join to get to this education, that's fantastic.
And there's nothing wrong with doing both. When you break up your content into social media, micro learning, and full. So I'll use the AANA as an example. The micro learning is allowed to have sponsorship on it. The micro learning is not only attracting people to decide where I should invest my hour, right? But I'm getting paid for that through my sponsorship. But when they move into the LMS, it stops, right? And so when I move into the LMS, it's like, oh, okay, now I'm into the full session. I either go down the pay-per-view or I go down the subscription. The other thing they did, and again, good on them, is they said, let's have a few that are free. And let's have that as our try before you buy, because that is the internet. The internet has become this, I gotta try it before I buy it. And it just, we expect it, I think, as humans now. And so they set up where a little bit is free, and then they can get a taste for it and realize the content is meeting their needs, and they don't feel bad about paying. So long answer, but hope that answered the question.
Well, and I think that could also change the mindset too. I mean, it's always been, oh, we have to drive everyone to the annual meeting because that's our big moneymaker. But if your organization is known for the content it provides year round, someone might say, oh, maybe I want to go to that annual meeting because I have been receiving all this excellent education year round. And now let's see what I could get in person from all the other people that are there, and the events and the networking and all of that could be even more. So the year-round education, if you think of it in the right way, can drive the annual meeting live attendance rather than thinking of it the other way around, because that's a huge monetary commitment to make, to fly there, get a hotel room, and be there, when you should be bringing them into your association with the year-round content where it's not as expensive.
Yeah, but I've also talked to people who go, well, hey, but at our annual event, we recorded the PowerPoints with voiceover and we put it on a CD and we sent it out. Like, we did do it. Would you watch that on Netflix today? Other thing that Netflix and virtual conferences have done is now we know the difference between boring and elevated. And if we're going to want people to pay, either through their membership, for the event, through the LMS, you're going to see a steady creeping up of elevate the quality. And if you're going to go to the trouble of elevating the quality, please break it down into micro learning. So back to my nursing example, now we're starting to create 15-minute chapters instead of 1-hour courses. And so that I can come in on a break on my mobile phone and earn a quarter hour and then go back and I'll finish the rest later because it's in my account and I know exactly where I left off. And so and what I'm excited about with hybrid, because nobody loved, when we look back now, we should have not loved just in person. We shouldn't have, but we did. And when we looked at COVID, all we could talk about was, I can't wait for hybrid, yet nobody was doing it. And now it's here. This is the time to get creative. Budget will force you to get creative because it's too expensive to just blast it all. And it doesn't work to blast it all. So get creative and start thinking about that. And when that breaks that thinking, think of some of the things that Dawn mentioned and say, why shouldn't I be curating content like this beyond the conference? And really make my website, my association, #1 for education in its category. Because there's a lot of competition when you go online.
Yep.
It's different competitors than the old days. And there's a lot of competition. So you got to elevate your game. It can't be just, hey, I recorded it and I'll stick it out there with, without making it feel like the way Netflix makes you feel.
And yes, you have to think about your learner too. I mean, like you did with like the nutrition group did. I mean, they released it between lunch and dinner, and people learn differently. They don't want to learn in hour chunks or 2-hour chunks. Some people love that. Others want to get their education in 15-minute groups, little, segments. But you have to give it all to them so that they could choose how they want to consume it.
Agreed. Sherry, Kevin, anything else or any questions?
So I think we'll, with that, kind of wrap it up as we're significantly over, but we appreciate everybody staying on. We had most of the people that were logged in with us at noon have stayed on. So we appreciate all of the great ideas and your thoughts. Kevin, anything else?
No, thank you very much for everyone staying on board, and look for some of our future webinars. We have one in 2 weeks, as Sherry mentioned at the top of the hour. And we'll get this recording and out to you guys as soon as we can.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much,
Thanks, Dan.
And
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dawn. It was great.
Thank you.
Bye.